Hey everyone, welcome back to Shutter Magazine. I'm Dustin Lucas, and today I'm going to be taking you through the 3 steps to making your Lightroom workflow better. More specifically, we're going to be talking about retouching. So when it comes to editing in general, you need to develop a roadmap or a workflow. But more importantly, you might already be outsourcing your work. You might have somebody in-house editing for you, right, if you're the business owner. Or maybe you're the only creative and you're editing already. This article is absolutely going to help you on taking your images from Lightroom to do a light kind of base level edit, and then doing a Photoshop kind of basic retouching edit, and then another more advanced retouching edit that's going to be focusing more on those details. So, you might not know how to edit, or you might know how to edit or currently are for your business. What's important is you really want to learn how to turn around maybe a down and dirty edit for your client. So you might want to post something to social media within 24 hours of the shoot, or just have an idea on how to use the programs, or if you're talking to your customers and just kind of having a little more know-how in that program, just kind of sells your expertise a little bit more. So these 3 steps, which are going to help you build that workflow, start in step 1, building a base in Lightroom. Which we'll start with. Step 2 is going to be edit in Photoshop for basic beauty editing. We'll kind of get into that, blemish removal, flyaway hairs, cleaning up the shirt and any kind of distractions and things like that. And then step 3 is going to be that attention to details like we were talking about. So it's going to be dodging and burning, there's going to be creative toning, and more advanced editing. So let's dive into step 1, which is building a base edit in Lightroom. All right, so for step number 1, it's all about building a base in Lightroom. So we can look through our 2 images here, right? So this is shot out of camera. I'm pretty happy with the lighting, the color. There's good bones here, right? That's the most important part of a good photo, really, is to have good bones. And then post-production can really only enhance those good parts of the image, right? So this is my shot out of camera. And this is my final edit, right? Of course, I want to show something that's a little more flattering to my client, regardless of the focal length that I was using. I think it was an 85 millimeter here. Right, so kind of perfect portrait lens with the background that I'm blurring out, but there are just a few distractions, right? You can only do so much in camera. You can only catch so many things when you're in a live shoot. So while doing this shoot, there are some things that I already had in mind and kind of fixing and kind of bringing this image to life, so to speak. So let's dive into the develop panel and work on some of those basic edits. So I'm going to go ahead and reset my image here and kind of take you through my process. So first things first, I want to make sure exposure is good, right? Which I'm pretty happy with the exposure out of camera. I mean, it's a little dark in terms of density. Let's do my before and after here so we can watch that. So, I mean, I'm pretty happy with the overall exposure. For what I want to do for this image, I want it to have a little darker. My client has a little more of a darker complexion, so I certainly don't want to overexpose that or not make her appear as though she is. So what I want to look at is jumping into something like lens correction becomes rather essential for me when I start working on an image, right? Do I want to remove that vignette? Do I want to fix that distortion? Like for me, fixing that distortion kind of makes her face wider. So I want to leave that distortion alone, but some of that vignette I want to go away, right? So if I can toggle this on and off, we can kind of see right away, we kind of fix those areas of the image. Her arm's too dark, her shirt's too dark. I want to fix all that stuff. Now I'll come back later, of course, and darken the background, but I want her shirt, her arm, and everything like that to look rather as it did being there in person. So just showing you real quick, as I'm doing a custom lens profile correction, of course now I can't save this as a preset because it's a custom profile. So you just want to keep that in mind when you are adding lens correction. If you're fixing the distortion or fixing the vignette like I am here, you can toggle the distortion and really start to manipulate that just to kind of give you that effect there. I just wanted to remove the vignette, and that's how we did that there. So jumping into more important things like the toning, the density of our image, those are the things that I want to fix before going into white balance, which I'm pretty happy with overall, but usually I fix the toning things first with a lens correction, and then I go back and deal with color, because color kind of changes, its appearance changes as you start to lighten or darken an image. So I want to make sure the toning, the exposure, the brightness, and all that's dialed in. So highlights and shadows, I'm pretty happy with. I mean, I got some clipping here, which I can hit the J key, and I have a little bit of black point clipping, but now I feel like her hair just looks kind of gray and looks kind of odd, right? So I'm gonna leave that alone. And I'm gonna jump in here, and I wanna get a perfectly dense image. So I'm gonna hold Shift, double click on whites, and immediately it raises the whites to kind of give me a little more contrast, and then I can double click the blacks. Now for me, what I like to do is just add some blacks here to get rid of that clipping that's happening in the hair. And I'll go in and add just a little bit of shadow recovery, a minor amount, right? So if we're looking at this image, before and after, minor stuff, right? But I haven't touched exposure, right? Even if I put exposure back to 0. I mean, a lot can happen with these other sliders outside of our exposure slider. So as you can see here, we can correct some of those things right out the gate. And I'm pretty happy with this overall. Like I said, I'm happy with the white balance. I mean, I could change this to custom just for the sake of doing it, or hold Shift if I want to do like an auto white balance, but I'm really happy with the way that this looks like out of camera, so I'm going to leave that alone. Now, looking at color and wanting to affect some of these or correct some of these maybe blues in the shadows, I can jump down here to HSL. I can choose the target adjustment tool, and I can click in areas where I know that there's some blue tones, and I can desaturate them. Now you have to be careful, right? Because if there's other blues in the image, it's going to affect that. But this does a pretty good job of neutralizing. You can see that here and here. It's pretty subtle, but until I toggle back and forth, you wouldn't even know it was there. But it's enough for me that I can correct in Lightroom, and I want to take care of it. Now, something you have to consider, if you are messing with skin tones, right, especially with having orange nail polish and things like that, you want to be very subtle with those adjustments. And for me, I don't really have any, I like the warmth in this image. I mean, the sun was hitting her skin. It's really bringing out those brown tones in her complexion. And I just overall was very happy with the lighting. And we kind of caught that perfect moment, right? I'm sure photographers say that all the time. Kind of hokey, but it was. I mean, the sun was hitting. It just worked out really well. So I don't really want to pull any of that out of our image. So overall, I'm pretty happy with before and after right here. And that's basically it. So now we're able to move on to step 2, which is going to be using the Edit in Photoshop feature. All right, so step number 2 is going to be editing in Photoshop using the Edit in feature in Lightroom, as well as looking at some of those basic beauty editing things that we need to do, like blemish removal, flyaway hair removal, skin touch-up, color, all these kind of basic level things to get the image to a place that I think is presentable to my client, but also ready for social media, ready for marketing. So first things first, before we do the Edit in feature, we want to make sure our preferences are dialed in. Now, jumping into the preferences panel and looking at external editing, we have the ability to choose file format, color space. The hell is that, right? So sRGB, Adobe RGB, Photo RGB, what's the right one? What's the one, I shoot in X bit and RAW. I have this, very expensive camera system, like all these kind of questions on how you should be editing, what things you should be doing. I always leave these at like the default, right? So I'll leave color bit depth at 16. I mean, 8 and 16, not a huge difference on most of our monitors, but there is kind of a difference there. If you want to research that, you certainly can. I'm not necessarily going to go into a heavy technical battle on what's better, 8-bit or 16, but I kind of leave these at the default. TIFF is a little more flexible than the PSD because a TIFF file you can save up to 4 gigabytes. A PSD you can only save up to 2. So a PSB, which is like a Photoshop, like a bigger Photoshop file, that one can be larger than a TIFF, of course, but I stick with TIFF. 300 resolution, which is ready for print. I changed that from 240, which is pretty common. And I just leave the compression at zip. Those aren't things that I mess with. Now, to open this image into Photoshop, or if I want to open up multiple images, I can do it from grid. Doesn't really matter. I hold Command and hit the E key. And what that's going to do is it's going to open up my ARW, my still raw file, into Photoshop. So in order to actually save this in Photoshop at any point in time, I always do it at the beginning just as I'm a creature of habit, right? So making sure I'm doing the same things over and over again, I want to make sure Command S. So now my file is saved as a TIFF file, and it will go back into Lightroom and automatically save in my catalog, right? So just to give you an idea of what we're doing here, here's our final image that we're going after, right? So here's where we're at now, and this is kind of the final we're looking for. So for me, first thing that I want to make sure, and if we kind of take a step back, right? So if you use Pro Photo RGB, okay, and you open your image up into Photoshop and it looks like garbage, probably because you have don't color manage this document turned on, right? Or you have working RGB, which don't help. You have a profile that's applied to this image, right? So this image has a Pro Photo RGB color space applied. You have to make sure that same profile is being applied in Photoshop. So if you do open up an image and it looks dramatically different in Photoshop, you want to check the assign profile from the edit panel. It's super helpful. I had to Google it myself because this image opened up into Photoshop and it looked like trash, right? It's like, that's not how she looks. Is there something wrong with my Photoshop? Do I need to update? But a quick Google search got me there. And I'm learning things every day. So I always recommend if something's off like that, you can literally just type verbatim what the problems are. But that's that kind of first problem that I have. Now, keep in mind I'm using ProPhoto to edit in, but when I save this image out, it'll be sRGB all the way. Most labs, most printers want sRGB. So just keep that in mind. This is just something that I chose as a default from Lightroom as a working file, right? We're going to be editing on this. This isn't a final file. So now that we've got those bases covered, let's jump into some editing here. So whether you've purchased a beauty retouching action or going online or built your own, I highly recommend building an action set for all the stuff you want to do, right? From top to bottom, dodge and burn, white recovery. You can have different saturations, like if you want to reduce the reds in the skin, blues, things like that, whites in the eyes. All these are kind of this is my tool set for my basic beauty editing. And so I have it at the click of a mouse. I can apply it immediately on an image. It becomes very helpful for me as I go from the bottom layers and work my way up. So first things first, I have portraiture applied to this entire image, right? Well, I don't want it to soften the hair. You know, it does a pretty good job of finding skin tones, but things that fall into that same color range as skin tones, it's going to soften those as well. So I usually invert, right? Command I, invert this layer, and then I want to use my brush key by hitting the B key. And then I want to make sure, right, foreground color right now is black, which would be painting out or masking out on the skin. Well, I have a completely masked out layer here. It's all black. So I have to do the opposite. So I hit the X key to toggle black and white for masking, right? Shortcuts are super helpful in Photoshop. And keep in mind I'm working on a mouse, so don't judge me as I'm going through here. I'm not on a Wacom tablet or any of that kind of stuff, but I want to show you guys whether you have those kind of high-end tools or not, you can do this level of editing with a mouse or on a laptop or whatever, but I think the core of this is going to be about the workflow. So as I'm coming in here, I want to make sure opacity is 100%, which is good. I could hit enter if I wanted to change the opacity. Pretty easy to do, right? Another hotkey. And opacity is going to be the amount that is going to be painted. So for me, wherever I'm painting, I want it to be 100%, but I only want to paint her skin. So I'm going to do this by hand, okay? But you have different selection options, right? If you wanted to go in here and choose, let's see, color range, and you wanted skin tones to be in the color range, right? It's going to add a whole bunch of other crap, which is, just kind of trying to deal with that, to me, just doesn't really make sense. I just want to quickly paint on her skin. So I'm going to do that, right? So if I hit the backslash key, which is underneath delete or backspace, it'll show me where this effect is applying, and where it's in red, it's not applying, which I think is very important to see. We can quickly run through this just to make sure her eyes aren't being masked in, right? All these things are important. Now you might be thinking, why is he masking in her eyebrows? Great question. Doesn't really matter. But I just want to kind of show you how that effect works so you can check your work when it's all said and done. But I like to do a pretty quick and loose just to kind of check my work. Make sure we are smoothing everything here. Don't really need to do too much down here just because I was shooting pretty wide open. Doesn't really need too much skin smoothing across the board. I have a pretty soft brush, so it kind of blends okay. Now, not a crazy amazing job, but it gets the point across, right? Do I need to smooth her hand? I don't think so. I don't think her hand or her arm needs smooth. Those seem pretty straightforward to me. But we can kind of see real quick just the effects. We'll zoom into 100%. No effect, effect. So if we want to amp that up, of course we can, right? I think that's too much for me. So I'm going to dial that back to probably about 75. I think that does a pretty good job. Oops, excuse me. Portraiture. Again, Portraiture is a paid plugin. I get nothing for talking about Portraiture. I use it. I think it's great. It's pretty straightforward. So let's move into the healing brush for blemishes. So as we're coming in here and we want to be working at 100%, we're going to go to our removal layer. So this is an empty layer that we can use the healing brush by hitting the J key. And I think it automatically chooses the spot healing brush usually, or whichever one you had previously selected. But I like the spot healing brush because it automatically chooses where it's grabbing from. So I don't have to sample, I don't have to think about it. I can just come in here and click away. Doesn't matter, right? And really starts to kind of blurry up, right? You have these different options. Content aware does a little bit better of a job than proximity match, but you can also hold the J, you can hold shift and hit J, and it'll move to the healing brush, which instead of automatically sampling, you have to choose, right? So as I'm coming in here and I just want to quickly clean up this skin, I can do that, right? So as I'm coming in all these little bumps, I just want to clean all those kind of things up. It's a very meticulous process, right? So even coming down here to the shirt, do a quick heal, right? Didn't have to clone it, but heal did a pretty good job. I just want to get rid of that mark. And we can come in here and do the same thing on the clothes. It's so great. So we can fix some of these wrinkles. Kind of minor things here, just to kind of get our feet wet on some minor touch-up work. Nothing too crazy. We just want to, oh, I clicked off my layer. We just want to come in here and do some touch-up. Now, same way with the hairs, right? We want to remove some of these hairs. Let's do it. So we can dive right into that. Get rid of those with the healing brush. Does a pretty good job. Now you want to be careful. We have too big of a stroke there. Right, as we're coming in here, might mess up a spot. And again, this is all in the removals layer. So if we didn't like what we did, we could always mask it out. Makes working non-destructively very easy. And working non-destructively in Photoshop is kind of like a no-brainer, right? It's implied. And now I kind of have some issues going on there, so I want to undo those. We'll leave that alone. Of course, in some situations, you might want to come in with the clone stamp when you start to get smudging, right? So if I get too close and I get some smudging like that, I'll just jump down to the clone stamp tool, really get rid of that, right? So spot heal, heal brush, clone stamp, all great tools, but you know, using the right tool, understanding the limitations, that's half the battle. So as we get closer to areas here, we're going to get kind of smudgy. So we need to come in, make sure our brush isn't too hard. And we can just simply come in and sample and clone out. In the same way, it's going to go all the way around the hair, right? We don't need to go through that whole process because that's pretty extensive. But overall, just kind of looking at where we would be if we're looking at this image realistically, we are, let's drop all this out, just kind of give you a point of view where we're at. Here's where we started, and here's just those removals, right? So pretty subtle stuff. But the next one, the eyebrow fix that we had done, is a little more work, right? We have this hair going over the eyebrow. How are we getting that eyebrow to look more full? It's a two-step process. So let's jump into our other image and just kind of go through that. So it's going to be a little bit of a heel brush, which I would probably, you know, I would probably do, let's see here, new layer. We'll call it eyebrow. And this is where custom layers would come in, right? So this is going to be a custom eyebrow layer. I don't want it to get blended with the removal because we were doing some removals. But as we go through this image, I want to fix this eyebrow. So I'm going to use my heel brush, and not the spot heel, but I'm going to use the healing brush. And I want to go through here, and I just want to get rid of this pesky hair that's just bothering me, right? So I'm going here, and I'm just going to start trying to, how easily can I just paint this out? Doesn't seem to be too easy. Right, so I'm coming in here and starting to get some pattern issues going on here. This might be something where I bring in the clone stamp. Clean some of that up. Now it's just starting to get kind of smudging. So what we would probably do is, once we get this kind of, yeah, it just starts to get really nasty. We would want to blend this. Let's go back. Let's see if we can get some work with the spot healing brush to kind of, nope. Proximity match. Let's see if we can get some even worse. So if we kind of keep coming in here and working on that, we can at least kind of work on getting that texture right. It's not going to be perfect, but then we can come in here and use some dodge and burn techniques to kind of fix some of that area. Now, for me, with doing some of that, I think, so it looks like I left, you know, a good majority of that eyebrow. So maybe I don't need to take so much of that out. And we'll just kind of focus on getting rid of it to here. Right? So in this section here, but the more important part of this is once you kind of fix that, and then you might want to come in here and brush 10, I'm going to put that to 10%. We'd probably come in here and lighten that up, right? Does all the difference, right? Like night and day, to kind of get that same effect. So it looks, the skin doesn't look blotchy there, right? And we could of course come in here and darken, and it kind of fixes it for the most part. So forget about detail work in there. What I want to look at is this eyebrow that looks just kind of falling apart now that we removed all of that. So we come in here to the eyebrow, we choose a brush, we would get the brush size down to like 2 pixels, okay? Now, what we can do is hold Option and we can sample different hairs. And what we're going to do is we're going to create these little wisps, okay? Now, you notice that my opacity is at 10%. Well, that doesn't help. We have to put the opacity at 100%. As we're coming in here, we can repaint that hair, okay? Now, again, I'm doing this with the mouse. Don't judge me. But what's important is you can come in here and grab different hair samples. No, not that one. We want darker ones that kind of stand out. And we would want to make sure, get some darker ones going. There we go. As we're kind of clicking here, doing a bad job of eyebrows, we would want to make sure we are kind of adding those back in. And we would do that same thing, of course, to hairs outside on their head as well. So again, very kind of sloppy job. I'm not doing this correctly as I would with a Wacom tablet, but that's how we got those strokes here, okay? So you're seeing the difference of the eyebrow getting painted in because we used those strokes. I just wanted to make that a point to make that kind of more specific. So let's move off of that and move into our color layer. So for me, there's some discoloration here that I'd want to come in and I'd want to fix. So to do that, I'm going to hit the B key for my brush. I'm going to use opacity of 10%, and I'm going to sample areas of the shirt that are more neutral to me. I'm going to do the same thing here. We're just clicking 10%, we're clicking multiple times to increase that effect. But you can kind of see just the subtle discoloration of the shirt. It's got some yellowness in it. And I just want to kind of fix some of that because to me, it's a little distracting. Now, let's jump into toning down the shirt. So we'd want to come up in here and reduce those highlights in the shirt. We would do the same thing. So to me, these highlights are too bright. And I'm clicking multiple times because the brush is 10% opacity. Every time I click, it's adding 10%, right? So in more concentrated areas, I'd want to increase that. But for me, if I'm looking at this image, the shirt is just distracting from her eyes. So I want to make sure we're toning down, right, the shirt, making it just dull enough as it's white. And we want to come in here and we'd also want to restore the eyes a little bit too. So removals, which become important as well for the eyes, is we want to make sure we are kind of coming in here, and you can use the spot healing brush. Oof. If we want to come in here and fix some of the spots with the eyes, we can. But I would want to use the healing brush. So I could choose where we're grabbing from. We'll grab from here. And we're just working with some of that. All right. Just kind of cleaning that up a little bit. Same way here. Right? And now we can go into whites in the eyes, and we can make our brush 100%. Oh, brush 100%. And we can, right, it's going to really kind of, does a pretty heavy job of desaturating. But once we do that, we can come in here. Oof, too much. That's why it's important to check your opacity here. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. Brighten the eyes up. We'll work on sharpening this camera right eye as well because it's a little softer, right? But we'd want to kind of see where we're at in our image, right? Those little things, the eyes are popping out. Now we'd want to make sure we're using a see here, we have a sharpening tool for output sharpening, which would be perfect for the eye. Kind of select the eye, bring the radius over here, and output sharpening is great. What it does is it sharpens the edges to kind of trick you into having that sharpness. So for me, I want to make sure we are painting 100%. And we could even duplicate that, right? To really have that eye pop a little bit more, and I think that that helps make the eye sharper, right? So we can duplicate the same layer once we have that mask because those things are important. Now, I'm going to tighten up my masking here a little bit because, oh, what's happening? Oh, I'm painting on the wrong layer, that's why. I'm not painting on my layer mask, which is very important. So let's go back. Oh, gotta hit the right key. So there's where we want to grab the eye. Perfect. Option Command J, it's going to duplicate that. Now we have we sharpen the eye just a little bit more, and those things really help. So between the eye sharpening, portraiture, blemish removal, cleaning up the hairs, all those things, these are all the kind of basic level beauty retouching. Even with some of this background, we don't really have any background distractions specifically that we need to correct in this moment, but this gives us a really good idea. Let's get back here of kind of going where we were and where we are, right? Brightening the eyes, a little bit of work there. Now we have some dodging and burning to do. We have some more advanced editing to do, and we'll jump into step 3. Okay, now we're ready for step 3, and that is going to be our attention to details. So as you can see in this image, we really start to, let's turn all the layers back on. Not that layer. We can really see the difference in the dodge and burn. There's going to be some liquify and some additional things we need to work on. So talking about dodging and burning, I need to burn the background down. So going to my darken layer, I also need to go to my brush tool. I hit enter, put in 10%, and now I can burn in the background. So that's a pretty quick and subtle thing that I can apply here. Not a whole lot of difference, but just a little bit to burn down the background. Now, I also want to add a little bit of darkness under the cheekbones, okay? And the way I do this is you're going to see this effect here on the cheeks. Well, you can't see it. Let's see here. One sec. Let's turn off Liquify. Turn on the toning. Now, you're going to kind of see that those cheeks pop out, right? Well, it's all because of this kind of darkening under the cheekbone. And then I come in here and I also lighten on those cheekbones as well. So it's a very subtle thing, just game-changing for dimension on the face, really. I mean, I don't have to do any slimming. I'm just bringing attention to those cheekbones and kind of darkening those things down. Now, I also want to come in and I want to darken down some of those hot spots too, right? It's because there's some hot spots on the nose. Here, I can also use my color layer and kind of come in and paint that in. But for the most part, I'm going to have to, I don't think I can recover those highlights. Those aren't really working. Come in and kind of just a little bit of darkening on the nose. A little bit there. As we zoom out, it kind of helps. we probably want to come in here with the color tool and add some, kind of helps to add that as well. Just those little things here. All right, nothing on. And adding that little effect goes a long way. So kind of tone that down. Can tone down the forehead as well. That's good. And we can also add a little warmth in the hands. I don't think that's helping. We can add kind of a new color balance layer. We can add a little bit of yellow here in the midtones and in the shadows. Right? Hold Option, click on the mask. Oh. Just Command I for invert. And we can come in here and just paint on the hand. Just to add a little bit of warmth on the hand if I thought it was kind of losing color. Same way there. That helps. Okay, so now we can look at smoothing the wrinkles in the clothing. That can certainly be done either with portraiture, or we can come in with the removals layer. We can do the J key for healing brush. And we can come in and sample if we want to smooth some of those wrinkles down, right? And we don't want to do them so much to where there's no depth in the shirt, but some of those wrinkles can be distracting. Might be a little over the top, but I think these kind of details help. That's just sharpness in the shirt. I don't think that matters. Let's zoom out. See what else is sticking out. Is there some more? See that color spot? Really helped out. Kind of yellow, and then that helps kind of get rid of that. Same way up there. I think that looks good. Now we would want to start to look at creative toning. I think that that becomes our next kind of spot to jump in here. Now, the difference between different toning options and things like that, that's completely up to you. I have my own creative toning that I was using from kind of jumping back into my other image here. And for me, if we were to, just to kind of give you an idea of where we are and left off, nothing too crazy, a matte style toning I just felt really ruined her hair. So I'll kind of show you a real quick matte style. Right? Just looks hideous. Regardless of kind of removing the contrast, I mean, it just doesn't really make sense, right? All that kind of haze, even if we take the haze out and just the matte, like it just, to me, it doesn't make sense. It's not really what I was looking for in a style. So toning becomes super important. I want something that's going to kind of like bring that out, and I felt like the lighter, the lighter neutral looked okay, but this modern style toning, which has a little more structure, a little more depth to it, really allowed me to kind of push this image and really bring the hair out with that sharpening detail. So for creative toning, you really want to do something that's going to accentuate your client, but not be so creative that they're like, my hair doesn't look like that, or my clothes look funny, right? You want to have that attention to details of those photorealistic aspects of the image, but still have your own kind of flair. So this is one that I kind of landed on. And I'm really happy. It kind of brings out the details in the image, especially in her hair. I didn't want any of that to get lost in the image, even shooting wide open. So all those kind of things worked out. And the last component to this is going to be Liquify. So, and I'm going to go ahead and just dump these two Liquify layers. What you have to do for Liquify, unfortunately, is you have to work destructively. And I know that's kind of goes against the rules, but it's a situation where you have all of your toning, all of your editing done. Now you're ready to do Liquify last, and we want to have a non-destructive Liquify workflow. Well, we just said we were going to have a destructive workflow. How do you have a non-destructive workflow for Liquify? Well, first thing we need to do is we need to create a smash layer. That's going to take everything that's visible in this image and create its own image layer at the very top. So if we hold Shift, Option, Command, and E, it's going to create this new layer 1. I'm going to name it Liquify. And I'm also going to click on this layer, right click, and choose Convert to Smart Object. And the reason why I'm doing this is any filter that I apply becomes a smart filter, which I can then manipulate in the future. So for instance, if I go into Filter and Liquify, it will save all of my changes that I made in Liquify in a non-destructive way. So if I need to go back and change the Liquify, I can. Now, if I need to go back and change toning, that's a whole nother conversation, right? So I can create an action to do what I just did there and apply like a medium amount of Liquify, which wouldn't be a bad idea at all, but you will lose the toning abilities to click that on and off. Now, what I like about the face-aware Liquify is I can change the jawline, I can raise the chin, I can shrink the face, shorten the forehead. Now, these are all things you really need to be sensitive to your client, right? You don't want to be messing with things that they're not going to like recognize themselves. But for me, I just wanted to make sure to kind of fix some of these things. And fix is maybe the wrong word, but I wanted to alter some of these things that the client wasn't necessarily happy with out of camera, and brought these to my attention. So, she had mentioned she wanted her face thinned just a little bit. Now, I did some of that with the editing. I didn't want to do too much. I mean, I didn't want her to not recognize herself or be one of those kind of like dating photos where it's like, you don't look like the dude in the photo or the girl in the photo, right? So you want to be, sensitive to those kind of things without, bringing attention to them. So less is more is always my approach when it comes to Liquify. Usually not ever at all. So it would only be at like a customer's discretion. So for these things I'm doing here, just to kind of show you the tool, I think it's important to understand the functionality, because I think she looks just as beautiful here as she does here. These are two different people. I wouldn't want to offend anyone or favor the thinner profile over more kind of normalized profile. So these are things that you just want to kind of consider and have that ability to kind of take the image back. But like I said, less is more. So the biggest thing I wanted to do was bring a little more attention to her left eye, or camera right, and make that eye open up a little bit. I thought it was a little kind of closed when she was posing here, something she had brought up. Raised the cheekbones, brought her face a little bit thinner there, but overall, kind of taking into this realm are my final thoughts, right? So let's just leave it there. So now that I have this image, I can turn that on and off, right? I can save this image, do whatever I need to do. But what is important is no matter what, when I close this image out, and I'll show you real quick actually, when I close this image out, we'll go ahead and hit don't save on that one, and we'll close this. When we jump back into Lightroom, our image here that we're going to reopen into Photoshop has that Liquify layer that I can double click, and all those adjustments are still saved non-destructively. So if I want to come in and make subtle adjustments, I can. So I don't have this frozen Liquify layer. Again, it's very important, but you have to realize that when you have Liquify turned on, you can no longer toggle toning. That's the destructive part of the workflow. Hope that makes sense. But overall, I am very happy with with the way that this image turned out from here to here. The only other thing I might do is crop this image in just a little bit, maybe to like right there so the eyes are dead center. And that would be something I do after the fact. Now what's cool about cropping in Photoshop is it's not supposed to delete my pixels. So if I come back into here, all right, I still have access to the full image. So that becomes very important to me if I want to undo a crop or something like that as well. So when we crop it, we don't just lose those pixels forever. So that's that feature there, delete cropped pixels. You have that unchecked. But that gets us our image, and we can jump back into Lightroom to make sure everything is in one solid place. Right there. All right, so now that we have the results, I'm really happy with the way that this image turned out. But more importantly, my goal with this is so that you're learning on how to handle the retouching yourself if you wanted to, or how to kind of adjust your workflow, how to keep things in Lightroom. Maybe you didn't know that there was an edit in feature. I mean, there hopefully is a takeaway here from you, whether you're a beginner or more on the professional end on the editing, but I think there's always room for learning. I think teachable moments are so important. So hopefully these 3 steps are applicable to any level photographer or editor. But I really want to challenge you to push yourself into editing if you're not, or trying these different features and levels of editing, whether it's action sets, working with Liquify in a non-destructive manner, creative toning, all those kind of areas that you could probably work on to just be better as an artist. So step 1, we were doing the basic stuff in Lightroom. Step 2, it was a Photoshop Lite, kind of the basic beauty stuff for editing. And then that step 3 is that heavier Photoshop where those details really come in, like the dodging and burning and the sharpening layers and Liquify, creative toning, all that stuff. So what I would, if I could give advice on where do you kind of start if you don't have your own images, or if you want to really kind of sharpen your tool set, is I would try and emulate another artist. So go find an image that they have and try and emulate that. So in school, we called that tear sheets. So you look at a photo, you look at the eyes for the catch lights, where are they using strobes, off-camera flash, is it just natural lighting? But you try and use these different aspects in the image to kind of deconstruct it and then emulate it, right? And what you do is you start to learn things like depth of field, catch lights. You can really start to look at like focal length and editing style. I think that becomes super helpful for you to kind of like emulate those things. And I think using these steps and kind of breaking that down might be a way for you to not necessarily wait for you to have a shoot yourself or an image that would make sense, but maybe kind of copying what somebody else has done, but to kind of learn through that same process. So again, hopefully you learned something out of these 3 steps, and tune in next month for my next article.